Right now, as you're reading this, who do you think is Israel's most dangerous enemy? Is it Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah, Iran, or other Muslim countries? Hamas and Islamic Jihad are bothersome, but Israel has plenty of capacity to deal with them. Hezbollah presents a larger challenge, but Israel still has the upper hand. What about Iran? We, Israel, could very well need the assistance of other countries such as the United States and allies in Europe, but I'm quite confident that Iran would end up on the wrong side of history. The same goes for other Muslim countries. Right now, as you're reading this, Israel's most dangerous enemy is fraudulent liberalism across the world. Please don't misunderstand me. I subscribe to aspects of liberalism and have some liberal views. I also have conservative views and moderate views, so I'm not some ultra-conservative mouthpiece who wants to bash liberals for the fun of it. The truth is, I'm frantically concerned that fraudulent liberals, with their magnetic buzzwords and surface-level good intentions, will put many politicians around the world in a very uncomfortable position. To choose between saying goodbye to millions of fraudulent liberals' votes come election time, or to continue courageously supporting Israel in her quest to eradicate Islamic fundamentalist terrorism within Gaza. But let's put the political dangers aside for now, for it is not liberalism in and of itself that is the issue here. What poses an enormous threat to Israel and the greater Western world is the complete and utter hypocrisy disguised as liberalism, what I call fraudulent liberalism. For example, many so-called liberals are indeed highly educated, meaning they have university degrees. Yet when you present them with certified facts about Israel and Jews, they reflexively refuse to be fact-checked. Mind you, these are the same people who furiously demand that news channels fact-check Donald Trump and others. Many of these so-called liberals also claim to be extraordinarily open-minded and enlightened, that is, well-informed. It's one of their trademarks. I'm a citizen of the world, they'll tell you. Yet when you try to have a respectful, mature, and honest conversation with them, not about opinions, but about facts, they immediately reject any piece of information that doesn't perfectly fit into their absurdly unrealistic and narrow-minded views. Many so-called liberals also purport to be totally anti-war, all about love and peace. Who isn't? Yet, on October 7th, Palestinian terrorists infiltrated Israel and massacred, beheaded, burned to death, and kidnapped more than 1,000 babies, kids, women, the elderly, and Holocaust survivors. How many of these so-called liberals took to their social media accounts to condone these barbaric and completely inexplicable acts, and instantly after Israel dropped its first bomb in Gaza to start going after the Palestinian terrorists who partook in these barbaric and completely inexplicable acts, all you heard from so many so-called liberals on social media was about the children of Gaza. Really? Many so-called liberals love to use catchphrases like, "live and let live." These are the same people who attend rallies where thousands of other people scream, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." That means from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, where approximately 6 million Jews live, including me, in a country called Israel. They aspire for no Jews to live anywhere in or near a future Palestinian state, or whatever the Palestinians want. How's that for live and let live? Many so-called liberals will vehemently tell you that they're not racist, prejudiced, bigots, anti-Semitic, or the like. Yet many of these so-called liberals proudly attend pro-Palestinian rallies across the world, where thousands of people verbally project vile things about Jews. Many so-called liberals claim to be all about people, no matter where they're from, what religion they subscribe to, or don't, or how they live their life. They hate flags, national anthems, borders, and countries, anything remotely tied to nationalism. All they care about is people. These so-called liberals will tell you this is why they're standing up for Palestinians. Mind you, there are countless groups of people suffering in unthinkable ways all the time, in every country, in every part of the world. Yet these so-called liberals never really stand up or show their support for the vast majority of these suffering groups. The only way I can possibly explain this rationale is these so-called liberals must be convinced the Palestinians are superior to other groups of people, or that Palestinian suffering is superior to the suffering of other groups of people. Nice. Many so-called liberals consistently question, mock, and have nothing good to say about the mainstream media establishment. Yet when this very establishment broadcasted a blood libel that Israel bombed a hospital in Gaza because Palestinian terrorists said so, which turned out to be an utter lie, these so-called liberals plastered their social media accounts with the mainstream media establishment's inexcusable fake news. Many so-called liberals accuse Israel of being colonizers and Zionism of being white supremacy. Leading up to the founding of the State of Israel in 1948, a healthy majority of land was legally purchased by Jews, mainly by Jewish philanthropists from Western Europe. With regard to white supremacy, more than 60% of Israelis are either fully or partially of Middle Eastern, meaning they look a lot more like the Palestinians than they do like Uncle Sam. But let's not forget, how dare you fact-check these so-called liberals? Shame on you. Many so-called liberals also accuse Israel of apartheid, a policy of segregation and political, social, and economic discrimination. There are a few points here. First, there is no segregation in Israel. This is because Israelis and Palestinians don't live in Israel. Only Israelis do. The Palestinians were invited to have their own state on many occasions, starting in 1947, and refused multiple times on grounds that they are not willing to share any of the land with Jews. Yet so-called liberals teach their kids, sharing is caring. Does that not apply here too? As it pertains to economic discrimination, Israel does quite the opposite. By letting Palestinians in Gaza and Judea and Samaria, also known as the West Bank, use the Israeli shekel as their official currency. If Israel didn't allow this, I'm not sure that any other country, including Arab countries, would allow the Palestinians to use their currency, since it would devalue said currency. Many so-called liberals will tell you that diplomacy and nonviolence are the only ways to make any real progress. Yet many of them devoutly support Palestinians, a significant amount of which either directly participate in or enable barbaric terrorism. Many so-called liberals stood arm in arm during the height of movements such as Black Lives Matter and Stop Asian Hate. I did as well. But when Jewish lives are lost in the most cruel and unimaginable ways, these so-called liberals basically act as though it's the Jews' fault for being murdered. Many so-called liberals were crystal clear during the #MeToo movement. Believe all these women no matter what, they said. Fair enough. I can get on board with empathizing with and supporting women who claim to have been raped or sexually mistreated. But when it came out that women were brutally raped by Palestinian terrorists, many so-called liberals were also crystal clear. Prove it. Many so-called liberals uphold democracy and democratic values like no other. And somehow they also unconditionally support the Palestinians who, mind you, democratically elected Hamas in 2007. What does Hamas stand for? I won't bore you with their mission statement to utterly destroy Israel and the 9 million people who live there, me included. Instead, I'll just let you know that Hamas is explicitly anti-LGBTQ+, anti-freedom of speech, anti-freedom of religion, anti-peaceful protests, and anti-almost every other democratic value. Many so-called liberals believe the most important thing right now is to help the innocent Palestinians in Gaza, and they certainly aren't the first people to have this truly noble desire. I say this seriously, not sarcastically. For decades, the Palestinian leadership both in Gaza and Judea and Samaria, also known as the West Bank, have received billions of dollars in foreign aid. Where all this financial aid has gone exactly, I'm not sure. But I find it puzzling that Gaza seems to be running out of everything right now, except for rockets and tunnels designed to maximize Hamas's stated mission to annihilate Israel. For decades, Hamas and other Palestinian terrorist organizations have used humanitarian aid to smuggle in weapons and dangerous materials in order to fulfill their aforementioned stated mission, to enrich themselves, to steal medicine and other critical aid from the Gazan residents, and to execute other completely irresponsible things with this aid, ultimately redirecting so much of it away from Gazan residents. While I truly hope I'm wrong, there is a very good chance that the vast majority of financial aid, including the aid that millions of so-called liberals are actively fundraising for and promoting as we speak, is going to end up in Hamas's hands, not in the hands of the most amount of people who need it. This makes the fundraising and promotion of this aid both reckless and lethal, because all this aid is really doing is enabling Hamas and other Palestinian terrorist organizations, such as Islamic Jihad, to continue to commit tremendous atrocities against both Palestinians and people in Israel. Many so-called liberals will tell you that the current rhetoric about terrorism from Israeli officials reminds them of post-9/11 talking points in the United States and other countries. My only question is, what about beheading babies, brutally raping women, kidnapping kids and elderly folks, and massacring over 1,000 people does not scream terrorism? Wait, sorry. I have one more question. What about Hamas's publicly available charter, which includes the complete destruction of Israel, does not scream terrorism? Many so-called liberals claim to be among the most compassionate and loving people in this world. But when you tell them that what they are doing and saying is anti-Semitic and Jew-hating, even if this isn't their intentions, they say things like, everyone has a right to their own opinion. Even worse, they try to one-up you by saying things like, yeah, but the poor people in Palestine, the Palestinian children. There's a word for this. It's called gaslighting, or coercive control. In other words, extreme psychological manipulation with the aim of having the other person's reality repeatedly questioned and unacknowledged. Lastly, many so-called liberals are Jews themselves, and some of them will say things like, I'm a proud Jew, even as they predominantly side with people who openly despise Jews. These Jewish so-called liberals attend rallies by Jew haters under the banner of pro-Palestine, completely naive to the unfortunate reality that these Jew haters accommodate Jewish liberals because they relish in seeing and promoting Jew-on-Jew hate. Today, these Jew haters accommodate these Jewish liberals, but tomorrow or the next day or next week or month or year, these Jew haters will turn on them. How do I know? Because history is loud and clear about this. Yeah, but history is just stuff written by the victors, many of these so-called liberals say. In some cases, this is definitely true, but not in all cases. We have an incredible amount of documentation and footage from and about the Holocaust, for example, and the winners of the Holocaust were not the Jews. Yet it's the Jews who have largely retained the crude memory of the Holocaust through memorials and museums in Israel and across the world, to bless the memory of innocent lives lost and serve as a painful reminder that these atrocities should never happen again. You see, the thing about many so-called liberals is they're not even liberals. They use the terms liberal and liberalism because they have good connotations in many circles, especially in academia and big cities like Los Angeles, Berlin, Shanghai, Sydney, Buenos Aires, Toronto, and Cape Town. But if your interpretation and manifestation of liberalism is inherently hypocritical, then you're not a liberal. You're a fake and a fraud.